I just wanted to give a couple folks time to dial in. So hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to Essentials Only, Basic Segmenting of Donor Communications. We are happy to have you joining us today and appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules. My name's Kimberly, I'm part of the QGIV team. And if you haven't had the opportunity to work with us before, we're an online fundraising platform dedicated to helping nonprofits like you raise more money. And part of how we do that is through webinars like this one today. So a few housekeeping notes for today. Today's webinar will be about 45 minutes with a Q&A session to follow. We'll be together today for just about an hour. We are recording the presentation and we'll be sending each of you a follow-up email tomorrow that'll have a link to the recording today, a copy of the presentation, as well as some links to some wonderful resources. So please be on the lookout. We are live tweeting today's webinar highlights. So if you are a Twitter user, our username is QGIV, and we are at #QGIVwebinar. If you do have questions at any point during the presentation, please put them into the Q&A box, and we will be working on those at the end. And then just a reminder, we do have a 4-question survey at the end that you'll be prompted to take. Would love it if you did. Your feedback is crucial in determining some of the content that we do in these webinars and some of the other QGIV resources that we develop throughout the year. So before diving into today's presentation, I did want to take a quick peek at QGIV's background, mission, and offerings. We've been helping nonprofits implement and grow their online fundraising programs since 2007. And as the importance of online giving has grown, our mission has remained the same, and that is to help others fulfill their passion to make a difference. And we do this through our comprehensive suite of fundraising tools featuring donation forms, event registration, peer-to-peer fundraising, text giving with outbound messaging, and auction events. But we do value our relationships and are very, very happy to connect our nonprofit friends to our partner network in hopes that this helps you increase your nonprofit's effectiveness and success. So today we are excited to introduce you to Canary Consulting, a full-service fundraising consulting firm. Canary has influenced hundreds of nonprofit organizations, helping them achieve greater levels of success. Oops, there we go. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our subject matter expert and speaker, Laura Krisenga. And as you will hear, she is an expert in her field. So over to you, Laura.
Awesome, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I am the president and CEO at Canary, and I have the privilege of working with lots of different nonprofits of all sort of shapes and sizes. With the team, we have 13 of us on our staff, so we're a small group and work mostly with small to mid-sized nonprofits as they look to sort of make change in their communities. So we do that in a couple different ways. We do it through campaign consulting, grant writing, project program development, and the space that I sort of live in a consulting space, in the annual giving space. So just helping nonprofits raise more money for their everyday missions. We also have a tool called FundKit. It's an online learning platform, so you can get more resources there. There's lots of tools, downloads, and some videos as you look to grow in some different specific areas. So there is going to be a lot of information here. I do love fundraising, so I get excited when we get to talk about this. But we really are going to spend most of the time on what are the segments and what are the kind of key differences in some of those basic segments. But before we get into that, we want to just make sure we're all starting at the same place. And so a couple sort of things to be thinking about as you think about your segments down the road is, at Canary, we really believe strongly that nonprofits should build relationships with donors. And for us, that means relationships are mutually beneficial and they're always personal. It's not just do everything for your donor and do whatever it takes to get a donor. We don't believe that's a good long-term success relationship. We think there should be benefit on both sides. But we also think it should be personal, and that we want you to kind of grow your relationships over time. And so that's part of why segmenting is really important. There's no one side that's sort of more important than the other. But when we're in relationship with someone, we communicate with them differently than when we don't know them. And we communicate differently with different people that we're in relationship with. So the way we text our family versus friends versus coworkers, or just different personality people is different. So we want to sort of recognize that, but also make it manageable, because we can't interact differently with every single donor, and we get that. So So we want to do that. The other reason is that we want to make sure that we're interacting in a personal way is that everyone wins when we segment. The donors feel more engaged and more connected to the work you're doing, which is a good thing. And their giving often grows over time and they last longer, which for you is a great thing. So we want to make sure that you're being set up for success as you kind of set the tone of what this looks like. So a couple reasons to segment. As I mentioned, it increases their engagement. It often leads to a better understanding of your work. Oftentimes, donors don't have a real great grasp on sort of the challenges that you face or the some of the different kind of nuances of your work and what your needs are. So the more we segment, the more they sort of pay attention. And so we can sort of help educate them a little bit better around our cause. It certainly leads to higher fundraising results. In the dollar sense is kind of what that one means. And then also helps renew those donors and fights lapsing, which is, I'm sure, a challenge for many of you. It's certainly a growing challenge nationwide. And how do we sort of fight the loss of donors over time? So the more you segment, the more you combat this. It doesn't solve it exactly, but it certainly helps. So really quick in the chat, I want you to just throw, what's preventing you from segmenting at this point? Just type your answer in the chat. It's helpful to see kind of what others say. It's helpful for us to kind of hear from you on what are those barriers that you have that's sort of preventing you from segmenting. So if you think of it, throw it in, don't overthink it, throw what comes to mind. And yeah, those are, yeah, that's frustrating and helpful all at the same time. So lots of answers, keep throwing them in there. Pretty common, I would say, what we're seeing. The most common barriers, not that there aren't some others and some that got mentioned, the most common barriers are systems, messy data, and time. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the barriers because you're probably very aware of what they are. But I do want to talk about a couple sort of hints and ideas of how to combat them, because probably the reason you're not segmenting is because of a barrier, not because you just don't want to do it. So there's probably something stopping you from that. So I want to just throw out a few options of how you might address some of those. Systems is the first one, and I think these are all critical. I wouldn't say any one is more important than the other, but you do need a system that can do it. So you certainly need a donor database where you can segment and track your donor information. And better yet, you need a donor database that integrates with your other systems. So with your online giving system, with your email communication system. That's one of the reasons we partner with QGive, because it does integrate with so many donor databases and other systems. That integration is really critical. And the more sort of the society gets comfortable and dependent on technology, the more critical that becomes. So having good systems is critical. If you don't have a good donor database, or you don't have a system that really allows you to segment, you need a different system. So email me after, we'll help. We have a list of, hey, tell us your size, organization, how many constituents you have. We can give you some suggestions about tools to look at that are really affordable. Great tools, many of which integrate with other good systems that we use too. So do that, or talk to other people. What do you love or hate about your database? Start getting input from other professionals that you know, whether on this webinar, somebody in the chat that might be in a system that you want to get more information about. But if you ask someone, what do you love and what do you hate about your database? If they can't answer both of those, then they're not really using it. So make sure they love and hate something, and then you'll know it's a real tool, because no system is perfect. Messy data is certainly another one. Many times there's lots of reasons for this. It's often due to turnover. Some of it's just bad conversions. Some of it's just not prioritizing cleanup, as things come in. But the more you can clean up the data and invest the time, the better your outcomes will be. And I know it's hard to dedicate time to data cleanup, especially when you're wearing a million hats and trying to do a lot of different things and always feeling behind. We get it. We walk alongside a lot of organizations that are often in that space, and we've been there ourselves. But investing the time in cleaning up your data will not only save you time down the road, but it will allow you to have better results. So it really is worth it. So do what you can, hire an intern, find some contract labor, find somebody to do something else. Quit doing something else that maybe is a real time suck that you can allow yourself some space to clean up some data, whatever it is, figure out a way that you can clean up some of the data and then keep it clean. That's another thing that we have that I'm happy to send. So shoot me an email if you want it. We have a database cleanup tool. It just maps out a full calendar year. Here's things you should be doing weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually to help keep your data clean. It's much easier to keep it clean than to get it clean. So make a schedule, stick to it. Again, I get that there's messy data, and probably for most of you, it's not your fault. You're not the one that put it in there, but you've inherited a system or some data and maybe don't have all the information, but you have to start somewhere and you have to try to start cleaning it up, or it's just going to constantly slow you down. So do what you can to combat that messy data and take the time that you need to take to do that. So, and then the last one is time. And I know that that is easy to say, well, spend the time, especially when you're trying to get an appeal or a communication out and you're just trying to get it out. The last thing you want to do is then segment. And so we know that that often gets sacrificed, but it's really important to take the time to do that, but you have to sort of plan ahead. So certainly one of the reasons that you don't have time to segment is probably because you're under-resourced. You probably do not have the staff that you need to execute the work that you have. And so if you can, advocate for those resources, be really specific. Here's the information we have. This is what we're trying to do. This is the additional time it's going to take. This is the outcome we think we might have. We need to invest additional either staff or contract resources so that we can do this. So identify a plan there, or look at other things that you're doing that maybe you can let go of. So maybe you have like a third-party event or other events or systems that are really taking a lot of time that don't have a huge ROI. And maybe this is the time to look at them and say, okay, we have to let go of that so that we can commit to doing these segments in a way that's going to help us in the long term. So that's something to do. The other thing to think about is cut down your list. Most nonprofits we work with initially are mailing and emailing too many people. And so it's costing you either in actual dollars because of print and mailing, or just in time and energy of having all this volume. So maybe it's really targeting your list a little bit more. That might save you some dollars that you can then reallocate to something else, to spend the time or to have a little bit more room so that you can spend the time that you need to do that. So there will be a return on investment, but it is not immediate right away. You'll have to do it, over the year, you'll see a return on investing in segmenting, but you can't sacrifice it when you get down to the wire. So keep that in mind. If there's other challenges that you need help working through, just reach out. We want you to be successful in this. So most of our time will be spent in talking about the actual segments. But if one of these barriers is really stopping you and you really you need help working through it, I'm happy to help kind of talk through. Here's some thoughts about how you might work through that, or how we've seen other organizations sort of battle that. So just reach out or ask another colleague too. I would say the few suggestions I have as you think about, okay, we've talked about segmenting, we know it's important, or we think we're committed to this. There's a few things that I would encourage you to really, really start with. One is to prioritize. So if you are not really segmenting at all, and when I say segmenting, I mean different people are getting different messages. So if you send a year-end appeal solicitation, maybe like in November, if everybody gets the same letter, so it's the exact same verbiage, same information enclosed, same remittance device, whether it's emailed or hard copy, if they're getting all the same, the whole list is getting the same verbiage in that letter, there's no segments there. That's just a communication. If different people get different versions with different language in those letters or emails, then those are your segments. So if you're not segmenting at all, start with only a couple. Don't try to do too many. It is a lot to manage. It does take additional time. And it's okay to just have a couple segments. We have lots of nonprofits we've worked with who don't have any segments initially, and we just have them do one or two in year one. See how it goes, learn some lessons. You can always add more segments down the road. You don't have to start where you end. So really prioritize. If you're already like, okay, we're doing a couple, we've done a few, we're ready to take the next step, that's great too. And we have lots of ideas about how to do that. But make it an incremental step. Don't have two and then go to 20 or try to really dial down on some of these. really broaden your segments slowly so that you don't get overwhelmed and so it doesn't get too complicated. So really prioritize those segments, which I'm going to help you do. If you're not sure where to start, I'm going to help you prioritize those. But we'll talk about those more in a minute. Make a plan. It sounds simple, like, okay, different messages for different audiences. It is simple in theory, but once you get into a database, it gets complicated quickly. So involve, if it's not you pulling the mailing list, involve the person that's pulling the mailing list in the segmenting conversation so that they can help make sure you understand, like, yeah, we can't pull that because we don't know, we don't know that about those people. Or how do you want to count pledges, or how do you want to count monthly givers, or whatever. So they just, different people have different perspectives. So make sure you're involving the person that's pulling the mailing list in those conversations ahead of year. Decide about things like, are we looking at calendar year giving or fiscal year giving when you're saying donors at a certain level? It doesn't matter what you choose, but you want everyone to be on the same page. So just sort of make a plan, be really specific with it. And then record what you do. Often we think, okay, we're going to remember, or, well, we have all the reports, so it should be easy. But sometimes it's hard to look back and see what were those segments and who was in that list, and how do we define major giver, or how do we use calendar year, or whatever it is. Take good notes and write it down, and keep it either in a in a folder, in a document, certainly in a shared drive somewhere, or in some kind of project management system you're using, wherever you email it to yourself, whatever you need to do. Keep a sort of document that has the paper trail of, this is the group that we did, this is who was in it, this is the message they got. You don't have to put all the messaging, but really identifying who was in which group, what segment, so that you can look back on it the next year and say, okay, that's right, that's how we did it. Yeah, we wanted to do it that way again. Or, boy, we had a lot of problems with that, or it wasn't really effective, so let's do a different one. So really take good notes on that. And then most importantly, it's really just deciding, where are you going to start? And that's, I think, the most overwhelming piece. We were talking earlier, we work with QGIve quite a bit, and they have so many great tools, and they also work with lots of different nonprofits. And I know I've been a part of trainings and webinars, and I know they have too, where there's lots of discussion around like personas and really pretty complex segmenting tools, which are out there, which are great. And if you haven't sort of explored what a persona is and how it could work for your donor audience, it's a great place to get, but it isn't a great place to start. And so if that is sort of down the road for you, and you're feeling like, we don't have any segments and we don't have a lot of good data on our donors, so it's hard for us to create all these sort of automated systems, then we want you to start here. And so we're going to talk in detail about each of these segments. These are the 4, and then that last one are just some other specifics we'll talk through at the end. These are the 4 segments that Canary really feels like, if you aren't segmenting at all, this is where you should start. Or if you only have 1 or 2, make it be 1 or 2 of these, or add in a couple of these to the 1 or 2 that you have now, because it will be transformational, and not only in how you connect a little bit better with your donors, but in the results that you see especially from your solicitations, which is the easiest to measure. So let's dive in. So the first one is major donors. And we start there, quite honestly, we start there because often the major donors are giving a fair amount of your organization's resources that you raise every year. So it's not because they're the most important. Every donor is important, and we need donors at all different levels. But when we're looking at dollars, major donors often are giving kind of the lion's share of the dollars you're raising. So looking at them makes some sense for sure. For most organizations, we would define a major donor as somebody giving $1,000 or more in a calendar year, so in 12 months. So we're not talking like major. For most organizations, for some of you, it might be like $500 a year or more. For some of you, it might or maybe like a $2,500 or $5,000. It's not more than that. So if you had in your head, we often interact with people, they're like, oh, I thought a major donor was 10,000 or more, or 100,000 or more. I mean, that is major. But for most nonprofits, we would consider a household, so an individual or a couple or family that's giving $1,000 or more in a 12-month period, a major donor. And so that's really who we're talking about when we're looking at these segments in this. We also really believe firmly that your major donors should have individualized cultivation and solicitation plans. So not all donors give the same way at the same time or are excited about the same thing. And if you're going to really be individualized, it's the place to do it is with your major donors. So you want to map out sort of your donors and who you have at that $1,000 or more mark. And we're excluding companies for the most part from that. So any kind of like sponsorships, corporate partners, things like that, for the most part, we would not include in this. There are some people who like own a company and maybe give from the company. That's a little different. You can kind of use your judgment. But if you have an event and you have sponsorship around that event, we would not include those in this particular segment. Typically, we're looking at individuals and households as we're talking about major donors. So as you do that, look at that individual plan and say, okay, this person typically gives this much. This is kind of the way they do it. They do it at year end, or they do it at the event, or whatever that looks like for them. So you kind of know the timing of when they give. And this is where we think we can get them. Like, we think they're giving their best gift already. We think there's tons of room for them to increase, whatever that is. And then what the plan is for this year. And make sure that your communications work into that plan, and that you are asking them when it makes sense for them to be asked. So if you have a donor that typically responds to your year-end appeal with a gift of $5,000, which is not super uncommon, then make sure your plan includes some specific asking in your year-end appeal of, hey, thank you for your gift last year. Would you consider a gift of this much, or however you want to do that? So you don't have to do specific gift amounts in your letter. If you aren't segmenting at all, you don't have to start there. It just is it's a great thing to get to, and it is a good thing to do for major donors when you can. So certainly make sure it works into that. And then we always really advocate pretty firmly that whenever possible, any of your major donors should get a live signature. So anytime you mail something to them, it should have a live signature, a hand-addressed envelope, and a personal note. And I know that is a heavy lift for some of you. So for some of you, you maybe can't start it at $1,000 or more. You might have to go a little higher to do that. But again, these are people that are investing and partnering with you. And it's not because we need to cater to the donor or they're so important and we have to make sure they know it. That's maybe a little bit of it, but it's more about, we want to be in relationship with people. And we want them to invest and trust us, and we want to kind of grow our relationship together. And it's hard to do that when you're sending a lot of form communication and things that just aren't very personalized. So do your best. Again, if that part is overwhelming to you, that's okay. You don't have to start there. Do one of those. Start with a live signature or hand addressed envelopes, which volunteers can do, and others. It doesn't have to be you. It certainly doesn't have to be staff that are doing all those pieces. But see what you can do, and it will make a difference. This is the segment that we see when organizations aren't segmenting at all. If all you do is interact with your major donors a little differently using some of these tips, you will see a return on it. So if you can only do one, this is the one that we would encourage you to do, and play with that dollar amount if you need to. If you can't manage the number that you have, then raise the amount. And if you feel like, hey, that's doable, let's go a little bit lower, then lower the amount, so that you can kind of have a group that you can manage. So that's the first, and again, most important from a dollar perspective as we look ahead. The second is your monthly and recurring donors. I always say monthly. I can't stop myself. It's really recurring, although most recurring donors do give monthly. That's just in my brain. That's how I think of it, as monthly, but those ongoing donors, a couple things to kind of have in mind. Number one, it certainly is our recommendation and a best practice that when recurring donors first sign up, that they're signing up to be a recurring donor kind of forever and always until they say otherwise. So we don't recommend that you say, will you make a monthly gift for the next 12 months or something like that. It's just to say, hey, will you join as a monthly donor? And you can tell us at any point that you want to stop or increase or decrease or whatever. They can always change it, but there isn't like an end date. So a lot of this recommendation is assuming that that's the strategy you're using. If it's not, I'd encourage you to consider going to that, but then you might have to adapt these if it's not. The most critical thing with your recurring donors is to always acknowledge their current giving before you ask again. I think this is the biggest mistake that nonprofits make, in that they don't segment out their recurring donors who are already giving to you every month. It's coming right out of their account or on their credit card every month. And so when they get your email solicitations or your year-end appeal or your spring appeal or whatever kind of communication you're sending, especially when there's an ask in it, if you don't acknowledge that they're already giving, it really makes it look like you're not that grateful for it, or that you're not even aware that they're doing it. And so that doesn't help someone build their relationship with you when you don't sort of acknowledge what they're already doing. So if you do not have a system that allows you to sort of track that or pull them out, number one, you need a different system. But number two, we would rather you didn't communicate with them for that solicitation if you can't acknowledge that they're already giving. So if you can't do 2 segments, if you're only going to send, let's say you're only going to send 1 email at year end to everybody on your email list, and you can't pull out who's a recurring donor and who isn't, that just because you're in 2 different systems or for whatever, lots of good reasons, but you just can't do that. We would rather you didn't send it. That's how important this is. And we see so many nonprofits making this mistake. So really get serious about how could we pull them out, or how can we talk to them a little differently, because they are already partnering with you. So if you're going to ask them, you really need to acknowledge that. The other important part is monthly donors do kind of forget about nonprofits because they put it on, it's automatic. That's part of why they renew at a high rate, but it's also a little bit of a risk. So you have to kind of remind them of their impact. The people that are writing a check or coming to an event or giving online in response to an appeal, just a single gift, they're kind of doing something. And so that also kind of reinforces the impact to them, makes them a part of it. But when that auto payment is coming out, that donor isn't really being reminded of their impact. So you need to do that. So make sure you're reminding them of their ongoing impact in different ways through your newsletters or other communications that you have. After 12 or 18 months at a certain amount, we would suggest you ask them for an increase. So if somebody signs up and says, I'm going to do $20 a month, I'm excited to support your work. After about 12 months or 12 to 18 months, kind of depending on where that is in the calendar year, we would say send them a solicitation that says, thanks for being a partner. Here's the impact you've had. Here's some updates. Here's some cool things that are happening at the organization, whatever, share a story. And say, would you consider increasing your monthly gift from 20 to 25 or 20 to 30? Make it a really small step, but ask for an increase. It's okay to ask people to increase, and they don't have to do it. But if you don't ask them, they probably aren't going to think to do it. And they also often don't remember where they are now. So if you say from this to this, that can be helpful for them. The last thing, and I'm a huge believer in recurring giving and building those programs, especially for small to mid-sized nonprofits. So if you don't have a branded monthly giving club, so something that says join our group of X or join as a recurring giver to do this, we'd encourage you to do that. It can be very simple. You don't have to put a ton into it. It doesn't have to cost you any money. All you need to do is name it and have a landing page on your website. So that might cost you a little bit of money to do that, but it should be really manageable to do. And it really, really, really can be a game changer. So, but if you aren't going to be able to take them out of your other solicitations, we don't want you to build a program around recurring giving and then just keep talking to them like you're talking to everyone else, because it's not going to work over time. You're going to end up with some real issues. So recurring donors is that second group. The third group to consider, and I would say this has especially been true in the last couple of years because events have looked different, is our event donors. Typically, and this is typically, donors renew the way they came in, which means however donors make their first gift is typically how they'll keep giving. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do anything to change that and that you shouldn't try, but it is something to be aware of. So if you have someone who made their first gift at an event, typically they will renew through an event or that event. If you have somebody who typically makes their first gift or has been giving kind of traditionally through the mail, or they make an online gift at year end, or whatever that looks like for you. Typically, they'll keep doing that. So sometimes we see nonprofits really trying to sort of talk a certain group of donors into giving a different way. And though that might make some sense sometimes it's like, just have them do that again. Who cares how they give? Just make sure they keep giving. So think about that. With event donors, the danger is if they're not coming to the event, you've got a real problem. And that can be for a variety of reasons. Either they have a schedule conflict, they didn't get invited maybe by the person that invited them last time, or you didn't have the event, especially with COVID or other weather or just environmental or social issues that are changing the way you do your events. Maybe that looks different now, and kind of who's attending. And so you've had to do that a little different. So looking at who's attending and making sure that you have a plan for the people that are attending is really important. We've seen a ton of success with people who often give it at an event, and just sending them a communication ahead of time of, we're excited that you're going to be there. Here's a little preview. You're going to hear this story or meet this person who is one of our program staff that's going to share more about, blah, blah, blah. Just kind of planting the seeds ahead of time of what they're going to hear about, and say, we know you gave last year. We hope you're going to commit again this year to making a financial gift. Just reminding people, hey, you gave it this last year, so we want you to do that again. So that can be a great thing to do. But you can't do that if you don't segment them out. And if they aren't attending the event this year and you're aware of it, make a plan for how are we going to get them back? Are we going to send them a communication? Are we going to try to get them to come to something else? Are we going to make a phone call? Certainly depends on the dollar amount that they're giving and how much time you can spend on that. But really looking at those event donors a little different, and not just dumping everyone in your year-end appeal is going to be worth it for you. So I would be pretty intentional with how you communicate with them and how you encourage them to give. The other sort of plug I'll make is, if you aren't doing mission-centered events, so your events are a little bit removed from your mission. And I mean things like, for most organizations, things like a golf outing. Although golf outings are fine and can be fun and can raise a lot of money, and you can do really great things with that money, they generally are not mission connected. And so you're spending a lot of time and energy getting people to an activity that really doesn't teach them anything. So they have a good time, and they maybe give some money, which is great. And you do great things with that, but you really aren't connecting them to your mission, because they're golfing, distracted, and typically some other things when they're on the golf course. And so it's pretty hard to really make it all about the mission. And I've seen it firsthand, and I used to manage a golf outing for a nonprofit. And it was a great event, and I loved it. And I loved the people that were associated with it. It was fun. We raised a lot of money, but I often had people leaving the event not even knowing the name of the organization they were there to support, much less what we did. So it was like, yeah, this isn't maybe the best way. So if you're doing something like that, you really have to look at, what is the return on our investment of time here? If you're doing a lot of events that really don't connect to your mission, if those people don't come back to that specific event, they're probably not going to give to you. And so is that really the best way for you to use your time? We'd say no. We'd encourage you to really look at, how can you build the mission into your events? How can you center your mission in those events so that you really are kind of teaching people, engaging people in your mission, and sharing updates throughout the year. We just had a client that had a super compelling student that kind of went through a program of theirs, and they're in the performing arts, so I feel like they maybe have a little bit of an advantage, but still everybody's got an advantage, just have to identify what it is. But they had a student who went through the program, had a really kind of unique experience, and she shared, and she wanted to share about it. And again, because they have performers, and that was comfortable for her to do, and she wanted to be a part of a program, so she shared an update at an event. And she did an awesome job. She was a very compelling speaker. They sent a follow-up about 6 months after the event, because she had kind of hit another kind of milestone in their program. And so they just sent a quick update to the people that had been at the event and just said, hey, we know you heard from so-and-so at the event, kind of remind them. And we just wanted to share, she just graduated from XYZ, and showed a picture of her graduation. We want you to know kind of the rest of the story. You're a part of her story as a partner of ours. And again, this was done in a way that I think sort of highlighted her assets, and it wasn't look what you're doing for this poor person or anything like that. And she wanted to share her story. So I think you always have to be really intentional around having like client testimonials or program participants that are at fundraising events. I think it has to be the right environment, but there are ways to do it. And we can share even in an anonymous way. There's ways to share those stories, and there's ways to keep people engaged throughout the year. Many donors have great experiences at your events because they don't get to see the impact of your mission kind of front and center, whether it's a virtual event or in person. That's their opportunity to really see their gift at work. And so they have these really transformational experiences at your events. And then we just kind of let it sit and we don't interact with them after that. So kind of keep them engaged and keep that feeling of that event going by sharing some highlights throughout the year on kind of what's going on with the people that spoke, or even the dollars raised that night. Hey, we were able to purchase this, or we did this with these funds, or whatever that looks like. So so do that in a way that makes sense, but make sure if you are doing a bunch of events that aren't really connected to your mission, it is going to be hard to get those donors to give another way. So then segmenting them in your mailed communications and email communications probably isn't going to have a lot of return. So if you do have a golf outing, don't feel bad. It's okay. And hopefully it's raising a lot of money for you. If it's not, I would really look at, is there a different way we can do this? But if it is, maybe think about, should we even be mailing to our people that are participating in that event? They're probably not going to give anyway. Maybe we just take them out and we just sort of get them at the event and leave them there. So sometimes your event donors, rather than segmenting them, you should just pull them out of your communications, of your solicitation communications. You certainly can continue to update them, keep them engaged, but we wouldn't spend a lot of money trying to get them to make a gift outside of that event, because our experience is you'll be unlikely to get them. And then the last sort of defined segment, again, this is if you don't have segments now, is your lapsed donors. So famous consulting advice is first prevent them from lapsing. So the best way to treat lapsed donors is to not have them to begin with, which is impossible, but it is still good advice. So the best thing you can do is get people before they lapse. So if it looks like someone is getting close to a time when they typically give and they haven't given yet, we would encourage you to get in front of them before they lapse. So think about that. And then if you don't, or you can't, try to get them quickly after they lapse. So don't wait too long. Try to get people as soon around that lapse as you can. We define lapsing as anybody that gave in a time period and then didn't give it all in the following 12 months. So if you look at, I have to even look at my calendar to see what month we're in, that's terrible. If you look at the date today, so if you say, okay, you could certainly go back a little further, but if you look at anybody that gave in calendar year 2020 and that didn't give at all in calendar year 2021 or since, or the first half of this year, that's for sure a lapsed donor. We would probably go a little closer and say, okay, anybody that gave June of, or maybe July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2021, and then in the last 12 months hasn't given, that's a lapsed donor. And we don't care if they just gave a different way. So maybe they gave year end in 1 year, then they gave at an event the next year. That's not a lapsed donor. That's just a donor that's sort of changing how they give. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about someone who gave and then didn't give at all in the following 12 months. Be clear with them. One of the most common reasons donors lapse is they didn't realize they lapsed. If you ask them, hey, do you support ABC organization? They would say, oh yeah, we support them and we are so grateful for their work in our community. And in your head, you're thinking, no, you don't. You actually lapsed. You didn't give to us in the last 12 months. But a lot of times the donor just doesn't know it or doesn't realize it. And I think especially over the last couple years, because of certainly all that's going on for everyone, but also because so much of fundraising and so much of events has been different, and people have had a lot of different sort of things happening at different times. There isn't sort of that normal cadence that we're used to. We've seen a lot of kind of weird things happening around lapsing in the last couple of years. So So be clear with your donors. Hey, we miss you. We appreciated your support in 2020 and we've missed you since then. And we need you to come back to us in 2022. There's lots of work ahead of us. Here's what we're excited about. We hope you'll make a gift today to help us do that. But if you don't say the words, you gave here and you didn't give, and we want you to come back, sometimes the donor just doesn't realize it. But you can't do that if you don't pull this group out and send them a little different version of the letter or the communication that you're sending. I would also say at a couple different places, people aren't the greatest readers and aren't the most careful readers. So say it at the beginning, say it at the end, put a little personal note on it, whatever you can do to say, hey, we've missed you and we want you to come back to us is a really compelling thing. So do that when you can. And I'm throwing this in there just as hopefully a point of encouragement. Overall average donor retention in 2020, and this is from a couple different sources, so it's not exact, but it was about 35%, which means 65% of just donors, if you look at all donors, so new donors, returning donors, major donors, everybody lumped together, the average donor retention for nonprofits was only 35%. So it's so very low. And it's very expensive for nonprofits to acquire new donors because it's a lot of work. And there's a lot of competition. And so, and the competition is not typically other nonprofits, just a side note. It's really our consumer society. So, we don't want to feel bad about people giving to different nonprofits. Most donors give to many different nonprofits, and that's a great thing. There's plenty of resources for our nonprofits in our communities. It's all the other things that people spend their money on that are really the competition we see for most nonprofits. So, but if your overall donor retention rate is low, if it's in that 35, or even if it's like 50%, there's some reason to pay attention to lapsing donors, and can you try to get them back? It's so much better if you can recover a lapsed donor quickly, and you can do that through having a segment in your communications, and it can be email, it can be hard copy, whatever works for you. I would really encourage you to think about having a lapsed donor segment so that you can try to pick them back up quickly, because once they're gone for a year or two, it's pretty unlikely that you'll get them back without doing something pretty significantly different. So it doesn't mean they never come back. It just means you're going to have to really change your strategy to get them. You probably can't just keep mailing newsletters and appeals and inviting them to events and get them. That's probably not going to work. So you'd have to do something pretty different. The last group that we want to look at, and this is really for those of you who maybe are doing most of those or some of those, or you felt like, hey, I'm ready, I've taken, or maybe once you do this, you're going to come back to this and say, okay, I did those first few, I feel like I've got my feet under me, I want to kind of take it to the next level. There's kind of some strategies that you can use. So the first is to break down those existing segments, so those first 4 that we talked about, into 2 groups based on gift size. So you could take your major donors and say, I'm going to split them and say, okay, any donor that gave $10,000 or more, I'm going to have kind of segment 1A, and anybody that gives $9,999 to $500 or $1,000 is going to be segment B of that. So sort of breaking it down that way. Same thing with your event donors, recurring donors, is just saying, okay, looking at their gift amount in addition to kind of that mechanism that they're giving through is one way that you can dive deeper. If you're not doing a lot of segments or you're only doing one, don't start with this. It's better to just do it by system, by event, recurring, major, and lapse. Do it that way first versus gift amount. But this is a good place to go from there. Or if you feel like, okay, we've done those first 4, we're feeling good, or we're feeling like we can do that, then there's some other groups to think about. These are just common groups that we see nonprofits having success with segmenting their communications to. Certainly depends on the type of organization. So it might be volunteers, could be members. For some organizations, members could be something like season subscribers, ticket buyers, students, things like that. So think about kind of what does that mean for you. First-time donors can be a great group to talk to a little differently. Like, hey, you joined us as a supporter this year. We're super excited to have you. Here's kind of what this is going to look like. Here's how we're going to partner together. So again, talking to people different when they first join you can be really meaningful. Memorial givers is another big one, again, depending on if you get a lot of those. Memorial givers are very hard to renew, which makes a lot of sense. And so you really want to think about, we either need a strategy for them, or maybe you sort of segment them out of your communications or just do something different. That's something. Crowdfunding, again, very hard to renew. It doesn't mean that's bad, but you just maybe need a little different strategy. So that's things that come through, like so-and-so is doing a fundraiser and they're raising money on your behalf. And so then they get, 10 or 20 donors through that activity, which can be great. How do you renew those donors can be a little different than kind of your traditional online or direct mail donors. So that's one. And then direct mail, certainly for some organizations, can be a really, really big segment. For other organizations, it's a really small part of your kind of fundraising pie. So it just depends on the type of organization you have. And then the other way to do it is by specific program or interest area. So if you're a nonprofit that maybe does, a couple different kind of elements of service. So maybe you do some like workforce development. Maybe you do some kind of food educational related things, and maybe you do some like business loan stuff or whatever it looks like. So whatever those different things are, different people might be more passionate about different pieces. So really identifying their interest areas, your donors' interest areas, and then talking to them with programs that are meaningful to them. And then track your outcomes. That's the best thing you can do, is do some of these segments and see what's working. And if you're like, yeah, we did all this work and these 3 were awesome, but this one, we just did not get a lot of return, then quit doing that and try a different one. Don't stick with these forever. You have to see what works for you. But if you're not tracking it, you're not going to know. I will end with this, and then we'll hit any questions that we have. Segmenting does take extra time. It increases the amount of data that you have to collect and track, and it generally costs more. And I don't say that to be discouraging. I say that so that you realize the commitment that you're making when you go into it, but it also has a return. And so I'd encourage you to really think about, this isn't going to make it easier, but it is going to go better for you. So think about what you can do to do that. There's some resources here. If you want some follow-up conversation, you can scan the code. There's some other free resources that we're happy to offer. So just scan that code and we'll get in touch with you. And I'll turn it back over to Kimberly, who will take it from here.
Well, Laura, that was just fabulous. Every time I see you in these webinars, I learn more and more. So thank you. And we have some really great questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. We may go a few minutes over 3 o'clock just to get to these because they're really good. So Kristen has asked, how do you decide who should be in the database if you're suggesting narrowing it down?
So we would put everyone in the database, but not necessarily mail to everyone or communicate with everyone. So still track them in your system, but just not necessarily send everything to everyone. Does that answer it?
Okay. Well, Kristen, if you want more, just go ahead and type some more in. Dia is asking, how often do you think we should be in communication with recurring donors? I understand yearly for increase asks, but how often should we be reminding them of their impact?
Yeah, I'd say 2 or 3 times a year is probably great. So you can do that, but they have to be specific. So if you're sending a general newsletter, send a note with it that just says like, hey, because of people like you doing a recurring gift, this is happening either on a Post-it note or in an email or whatever. So something a little different, or send a postcard or something like that. I'd say 2 to 3 though is plenty.
Okay. Victor has put, how do you segment donors when most of donors give while they have a personal connection to the program or organization?
Well, again, I would segment based on how they're coming in. So if they're giving, even if it's a personal connection, if they're giving through the mail or through an event, I would start there. I guess I'm not sure exactly, but maybe shoot me an email and I can answer that better. I'm not sure exactly. Yeah.
So again, I'm just reminding everyone, we are sending a copy of this presentation out. So I know some of you want to see that QR code again or want to have Laura's email address. So I'll put the screen up with the contact, but you are going to get all this tomorrow. But if we have time, you can chime back in with more questions. Yep. A different Kristen, different spelling, has asked, would you send a general solicitation to a memorial gift donor in addition to their annual memorial appeal about 6 months apart?
I would not. Yeah, I would only, if you're doing specific appeals to memorial givers, either like in an anniversary or a certain timing of the year, we see that as the best option for renewing those givers, and we would not send other hard copy mail to them. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, again, if you have follow-up questions, please put them back in the Q&A. Emma has asked, should you segment based on geography if you only have one active program?
I wouldn't, yeah, that's a good question. And we didn't really talk a ton about that. I would say for most organizations, we want you to highlight the impact of the work you're doing and not get too hung up on, especially if you have multiple locations, not get too hung up on, this is exactly what it looks like in your community versus this community. So I don't, and certainly if your programs are all in one space and your donors are other places, I wouldn't segment it all based on that. I think you want to really highlight the work that you're doing more so, yeah.
So I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, AV or AV. What about people who donate to your org via a social media fundraiser? That's such an indirect way, but also a very successful way of getting dollars in, but harder to track in many ways and follow up. And then in parenthesis, and some of those donations are very small, like $20 one time.
Yeah, right. Well, number one, if you can communicate with them, we want you to. A lot of times you don't get the information through it. And we are not, and this is maybe whatever, we are not big advocates for Facebook giving and other like giving through those channels. We'd rather see you use Facebook and use a tool like QGive or another tool where you can control the sort of platform a little bit more and you get the data back, because a lot of those systems you just don't get the data and those donors don't really know that. So then you're like not communicating with them because you can't get the data. And we've had some real nightmares with organizations that just did not get the funds or the data through some of those tools. So we would say use social media to kind of get people excited, maybe not as the giving mechanism, so that you can communicate with your donors a little more directly. If that's not an option, then yeah, I think you just have to use those platforms or use the information that you have. And to me, those would be kind of in that crowdfunding, that last slide that I had that kind of talked about the additional groups to look at. I'd kind of put those into that. Those giving through social media would kind of be in that kind of grouping.
Okay.
And if I can jump in and add to that
please,
one, Laura, I couldn't agree more. It's oftentimes impossible to even have a relationship with those donors that you're getting off of social media or from social media advertisements. That said, if you are leveraging it to spread the growth of your organization, spread the reach of your messaging, and you are combining it with some sort of Facebook fundraiser, just know that QGive can help you combine the two. We oftentimes will work with our peer-to-peer clients and help them combine the peer-to-peer fundraising that we have on our platform, which does allow you to collect all of that information and cultivate those relationships, and connecting it to your Facebook fundraiser so that all of it's kind of working together as a collective fundraiser, and you are still able to get some information from those who donate through QGive. So definitely a tough spot to be in as an organization to kind of decide how you leverage those tools. I think they can work really well, and we've seen them work really well for our clients. But yeah, there is that negative on the side of trying to cultivate those relationships, and we can try and help you if you guys are interested in talking to us more about your programs.
Thank you, Brendan, for chiming in.
course.
That was great. At the moment, we have a couple more questions and we still have a little bit of time. Raylene has asked, does it make a difference to put in their past donation in the ask letter, i.e. thank you for your $25 donation last December? Can you increase it to $35 this year?
Yeah. It's interesting because we've done some sort of studying just of our own clients, and we're not scientists, so it's not like a real study. But what we found is that it depended on the organization. So some organizations, it was more productive for them to do that, and for others, it didn't make a difference. So my answer to you is it depends, which is not helpful, I recognize, but it really does depend on your specific donor base. So I think you have to test it. I'm a huge believer in testing it. Try it with half your group. Pick the small donors that there's a low risk to, and just split them in half in some random way, and then see, does it make a difference? And then you'll kind of know how your donors respond. If you can't do that, then I think you probably just try it and see if you can get any kind of anecdotal response. But it does depend. I would say even if you don't put their previous gift, more often than not, having a suggested gift amount can be helpful. So even if you don't go through and saying, this is what you gave last year, would you consider this? We have some organizations that just split it like anybody that gave less than $100, we're going to say, would you consider giving $100? So they don't have to do all the data sort of work of making sure it's correct and all that back end. And that has been successful for them too. So, but you'd only want to do that if they gave less than 100. If they're giving 100 or more, we don't want to kind of under ask. So that might be a way to group it too.
Good answer. I like that. Patricia has our last question as of the moment. For a direct mail holiday appeal, how many different segments would you make? We've only segmented them by current donors and non-donors.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So if you're doing those two, I would encourage you to add in majors. If you have recurring donors, and I'm talking if you have like 10 or more, so I'm not saying thousands, but if you have 10 or more recurring donors, I would add that in and just do those this year. Do your majors and your recurring for this next year. And then the next one I would add would be lapsed. I think current and prospective is okay. I'd actually rather you didn't do those and just group them together and did majors in that way. So we find that actually can be a little bit more productive. So you might actually not do those and just do major, recurring, event, and lapsed. Again, event depends on how active your event giving is, but I would maybe do 3. Don't try to do 10. It's too much.
I think that's sound advice. So thank you, Laura. This has been incredible. And I think we got through everyone's questions.
Awesome.
But before we do end today, I did want to share that we do have some exciting webinar programs. Some of you may be new to the QGIve webinars, but this summer we have some great topics: how to launch a monthly giving program, a presentation on the Giving USA 2022 report findings, and how that you can apply that data to your planning. We have a great segment webinar that's just for our animal organizations, and a few marketing topics. One on social media, and another is our first panel format webinar of the year on multi-channel marketing. So we hope that you join us in some of those. Again, reminding everyone, we're emailing out the recording today with the link to some great resources, a copy of the presentation. We have the contact information here on the screen for you, but it'll also be in that email if you'd like to reach out to the QGIve team or Laura and the Canary team. Please don't forget to take the survey. Again, we hope that you found this content and information helpful. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, everyone. And we will be in touch. You take care and have a great day.
Thank you. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.